Hello, Chris Shiflett.
Hello, my old friend.
I
How
know.
are you?
I'm great, and I'm better now that I'm seeing you. And I will have done an intro and stuff where I talk about how long we've known each other, and
Yeah.
it was way before you were in the Foo Fighters. It
Oh,
was
yeah.
you were in a punk band, as was I, and you came to see us at the bottom of the
Yes.
hill, and I'll never forget it.
Correct.
I'll
Yes.
never forget that.
But how did, okay, so I clearly remember being there that night, but how did we actually meet? Like, did we all go out afterwards or something? That's the part I don't remember.
I think you did. I think we did because you showed up with other guys from your band and other Fat Wreck people. I believe
Yeah.
maybe I can't remember exactly who, but I do remember you coming right into the backstage and me and you just like hitting it off immediately and
Yeah.
probably having a similar conversation as to what we're about to have, which is about nerdy guitar shit.
Sure. As we
Yeah.
often do.
As we often do. I mean, and why
A
wouldn't we?
conversation that's been running through the decades.
Exactly. For 30, it's almost 30 years.
Yeah. And I feel like even like after that time that we met that was in San Francisco. And that was like such a fun time. I was living in San Francisco and Fat Records is there.
Yeah.
And when shows would happen, like everybody that worked at Fat as well as Mike and if any of the bands were around, like everybody would go to the show. It was always like a very kind of like there was a good scene,
Yeah, it was great.
But also a great scene down in Texas where I would I guess luckily because we were both obviously touring a lot. My memory is that you would often be at like our shows then. After that,
absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I remember a weird night in Houston where both bands, you guys were either playing Fitzgerald's and we came to see the gig because we were playing the next night.
Yeah.
And we were with No Effects, but you guys were with someone else. Anyway, the tours converged on one night. I don't remember, but I do remember being in Houston. God, it's just so fucking long ago.
That's like one of those things that would often happen back then when things were a little less organized, where you'd be like,
Absolutely.
what the fuck? Why aren't we playing with No Effects and Hagfish? They're tomorrow night. We have a night off.
Totally. What the
fuck's
fuck?
sake? Why didn't anybody notice that?
Yeah. Who looked at this scheduling and was like, this will work out. This will be fun.
Yeah.
You
I
are
remember
also...
we had a great night like that on a we were touring Europe with it was us, No Use for Name and Swingin' Utters and Suicide Machines, and we played in like Rotterdam on that tour, and who was it? Fucking who was another? God, now I'm really getting senile. Waddy's band. Fucking what the fuck?
Exploited.
Yeah. Exploited. So we're playing, those clubs like over in Europe where there's like a big room, a medium room, a small room,
Sure.
And so they were Exploited was playing the same night that we were playing in the same club. God. And we were like, what the fuck? Why aren't they? And they were in a different room than
Why
ours.
aren't we just doing the same?
Why aren't we? So we went to the promoter and we were like, hey, why don't we just combine the shows? Like, let's just put them together, and put it in the big room, Yeah. And they were like, no, they don't. The Exploited doesn't want to do that or whatever. And so we're like, all right, whatever. So we each play our shows, and then afterwards, of course, as you would expect, we all wind up in the same room in the backstage, drinking beers together or whatever. And Waddy was like, man, we wanted to combine the shows, but promoter said you didn't want to do it. And we're like, what the fuck? The promoter said you didn't want to do it. We're like, fuck. It almost turned into one of those things like, let's go get that motherfucker. Rawr.
Let's kill the fucking promoter. But, being in Rotterdam, in any European, the European, this is not possible. No, this is not. No, this is not possible.
Yeah.
It's like, it is fucking. We, Exploited Stories, it's crazy. We went over to England for the first time, and we stayed at a hotel. Waddy is at the hotel, which is like, you just think British punk and and it was odd because the band Korn, this is like mid 90s, 95 maybe.
Yeah.
Korn, the Exploited, and that band, the Lords of Brooklyn, that like rap band.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
we were all in the like lobby bar hanging out, and the Lords of Brooklyn and the Exploited almost got in a fight. But I said the Exploited, it was really Waddy just taking shit out of his pockets, challenging all of them to be like, let's go. And we kind of knew we were like friends of the Lords of Brooklyn by this point, and we were advising all of them, like, don't get into it with this guy. Like, you will fucking die.
Yeah, you're on his turf.
You're definitely on his turf. You'll fucking die. Well, hi, buddy. You know,
hey.
we have known each other for so long, and I do remember you getting the gig in the Foo Fighters and loving you and being so happy for you.
Right on.
And that was
99. I can it was 99. I can say the same with you and Rise Against. You know.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Yeah,
you, sir.
It was one of those things where you see it and you go, that makes perfect fucking sense.
Well, and that's the same thing with Foo Fighters.
Thank you.
They're lucky to have you. Anyway, let's get into guitar bullshit.
Yeah.
You come from like family, like your brothers. You have two brothers that play as well. Is that correct?
I have two older brothers. I also have a stepbrother he's not a musician, but a music fan and was an influence as well.
Okay. We need those. You need the older influences in life to like hand you down the scrolls.
Yes.
You know, the sort of
absolutely.
You know what I mean? And like the good music.
Totally.
Like because the good shit.
Well, I always say I was really lucky to have older brothers. And really lucky with our sort of the gap in our ages, because my oldest brother is like 7 years he's about 7 years older than me, and then Scott's about 5 years older than me.
Right.
So like there's a decent sized gap when you're a little kid, you know, so that by the time I kind of came along and was, you know, can remember stuff when I was like 3 or 4, they were already like, they had like pretty, you know, they had a lot of records already. They had pretty strong musical tastes. Like they already were like, you know, knew what they were into, you know, and being a kid growing up around that, I just followed, you know, whatever my brothers thought was cool was cool. Absolutely. And I would argue it to the death. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like this Black Sabbath is better than whatever, you know what I mean? And just have those kind of schoolyard arguments based in nothing more than like because my brothers had the record, and said it was cool. Yeah. So and so all that stuff, like especially growing up like as a kid in the 70s and into the 80s, it's like just all that great classic rock was just in our house all the time.
You guys, you and I, because we're fairly similar ages, we were so lucky to have been budding guitar players at that age. At that time, you know, because we had every band, it was like you had to have a great guitar player or an interesting guitar player at the least.
Well, don't you think it's kind of the irony that we came of age at a time, like we spent our formative years working because, you know, it's the Guitar Hero era, you know, through the late 70s into the 80s and all that stuff, when it was all about the guitar player. Like to me, it was always, that was my favorite guy in any band, I was always gravitated to the guitar player. But it was also like the music that I was playing in high school. For the most part, you always had like not just a guitar solo, but like a really long guitar solo where you had to like really like work it out, you know?
Right.
And then the irony that we sort of came of age at this time when that was all thrown overboard.
It's true.
When it became totally illegal to play the way that we had sort of spent our whole formative years to learn.
It's true.
You know?
So the guys like you and me who actually learned how to play a lead guitar solo, it was just like knowing long division at that point. You know what I mean? It's like you're not
totally.
That's real cute. You know Phrygian or whatever, but you're not gonna. But you know a bar chord.
Yeah,
that's what you need. That. That's basically.
It's funny because I moved to LA in 1990, like with my friends, and we moved to LA to like make it with our band and. We got down there and we kind of realized, like, you know, that being in Santa Barbara, we were a couple steps behind, you know, where things were at that point. And this was like the rock scene had pretty much died, and the alt rock thing was bubbling up, but hadn't become Nevermind and Pearl Jam and all that stuff quite yet, you know. But it was on its way, and you could feel that, you know. And I remember being in a band in the early '90s and playing around LA, and like an A&R guy came to see us, and this was probably like 1993 or something, and by that time, you know, my hair was short. You're trying to like not let anybody know that a few years ago you had Bang Tango records and shit like that, you know what I mean? Like you don't talk about that at all. For sure. You know?
That band sucks, man.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And like, because before it was all like, you know, it was like safe to claim all that shit again. But like, and I remember this A&R guy came down and he listened to us play a couple songs, and he kind of went around the room and was like, you know, pointing at each guy, sort of describing, and he gets to me and he goes, and you're just like a total rock and roll guitar player. And in my head, I was like, fucking no, don't say that.
They'll hear.
Yeah, they'll know. I'll be outed.
Yeah. That's fucking, I mean, and that's true. You know, it's fucking true. And that was one of the things you and I talked about, because we were metal guys. We both liked metal, you know, and now I'm shameless about it. I'm like, fuck it. Yes, I love it. I still fucking love it. And I like playing that shit. It's fun. It's fun playing it, you know?
I mean, don't you think, especially with the punk rock scene that sort of sprung up in the late 80s and through the 90s, that like most, or not all, but like most of the people playing in those bands had grown up on Metallica and fucking Iron Maiden and Judas Priest. It's so, you just listen to that music, it's so informed by metal.
Absolutely.
That, I mean, it's sort of like, that's like the ingredient that at the time maybe nobody would openly discuss.
Well, even the guys that sort of were the sort of precursors, you know, Brian Baker, Stephen Edgerton, those guys, they were into metal and rock and roll, and Gary Moore, Michael Schenker, and just, you know, that we all were. There was no way. It was ubiquitous. There was no way you were going to get away from it unless you were a complete artist and maybe you came to guitar as like a paintbrush, like an SST guy or Sonic Youth, where you were completely influenced by, you know, Mike Rybo or you know, some Fred Frith, you know, like you weren't coming from rock and roll. You weren't coming from any sort of aggressive music.
I mean, I think that honestly, like, I mean, if I can talk shit for a minute, and I'm not gonna name names, but like a lot of people that it always seemed to me that if your starting point was like punk rock of a certain age, that there was a certain soulfulness to your playing that was all just missing forever. Whereas if maybe you started a little, like you said, like Schenker, Gary Moore, people like that, it sort of informed your sensibilities in a way that I don't know. To my ear is just the type of playing I prefer. You know?
I fully agree with you. And you know what? For me, it was a lot more evident when I would listen to them play rhythm guitar, because if a guy was sort of naturally behind the beat, even a bit, you would go, you didn't just listen to punk rock, you know?
Right.
And if there was a guy that was pushing that band or right on that, you know, you could tell. It's like, oh, you know, because even Johnny Ramone, there is a tad bit of latency. You know, he's behind it just a bit. How could he not be? He grew up with, you know, all the 60s Motown and stuff like that. So it's funny you say that, because I've always sort of noticed that as well. It's like you could tell the guys that sort of just got a punk record and that was their sort of Bible, and they didn't do any other research. It's just like, I know a bar chord now, I can write a song, I'm done. You know.
Well, there's with drummers too. You know, like, I mean, there's a thing. You mentioned the Ramones, and I was thinking that like they're different drummers in the sort of the glory days. The Ramones had that ability to make it fast. It'd be, you know, but it was still somehow like there was a pocket to it, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like in that way, like, and to me, like Dave Grohl's such a really good, he's just like, you know, such a great example of that on the drums, a guy that can push the song forward, but it's always informed by that bottom thing that he's got.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. And you know, a true testament to that, you were there in Australia. We asked Dave to come on and play an old Scream song with us, Came Without Warning. And that's a fast song, but it was still done with such heft and such weight to it. I was like, Jesus Christ. You know? And we had jammed all day with him and doing Bad Brains and Minor Threat covers. And you came in and we were all messing around, fucking around. And it was, you know, he had that sort of, but you know, you're right. It's like a Bonham aesthetic to sort of everything, you know?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned like rhythm. You always hear that with people's rhythm guitar playing. Like, I was a really pretty lousy rhythm guitar player until I joined No Use for a Name. Made me a much better, and then Foo Fighters too, in different ways, because like I was so lead guitar centric, I think, growing up, you know, in high school and stuff, that I didn't, and the concept of like, follow the drummer. Like, nobody ever told me that, you know what I mean? Like, I never thought about that until maybe I was, 18 plus, you know?
Right.
But I remember that, like, and joining No Use was the first time I was in a fast kind of like, you know, I'd been in like a couple of punk rock bands in high school, but but it was different. It was the era was slightly different. Like the skill set was somewhat different. You know what I mean? Like No Use for a Name was the first band I was in that did all that like
yeah.
You know, all that kind of like you think of it as like kind of like precision palming rhythm stuff. You know what I mean? And I was fucking lousy at it when I first joined. You know, especially like that, like the really fast, like all that stuff. You know what I mean? Like I would just sputter that shit pretty hard, and it took me a while to sort of get that up to speed. You know,
you could have fooled me because you must have had it up to speed by the time I saw you, because I always thought you were just fantastic, and I was always like, you know, even before I knew you, I was like, I want to know that guy. You know what I mean? 'Cause like we're gonna have stuff to talk about.
You know who was the best at that? I think of that era to me was Luke from Good Riddance. You ever watch his right hand?
Oh yeah, Luke's fantastic.
His fucking right hand is bananas.
Yeah, Luke's fantastic.
Yeah,
you know
he could do that fast palming stuff so good.
Luke, and Luke and I have had this conversation many times as well. He came from thrash metal, like I did as well, and it's that I feel like that what you're talking about, that phrasing definitely came from a lot of like heavier metal, like thrash metal, like Metallica and things like that,
Slayer and all that stuff.
Exactly. But you know what, that swath of music, that genre, the Fat Wreck thing, you know, for lack of a better term, it was so curated and it was so specific, you know, from you guys to Lagwagon to, you know, Good Riddance. There was a definite phrasing thing happening that made it sort of sound different than all of those other, what you would call punk bands of the 90s. You know, Rancid didn't do that. And, you know, but bands on Fat did, you know, there's Propaganda, Chris Hanna, which is fucking fantastic as well.
Absolutely.
And so it was a thing. It was there was a lot of metal influence in that guitar playing. Absolutely. You know?
And ironically, Fat Mike is the least heavy metal person on the planet.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like, but he had a lot of like, you know, he would come up with a lot of those crazy picking patterns and stuff too. Like, so I don't know where he got it from, because he definitely was not listening to Blizzard of Oz when he was a kid.
Definitely not. Yeah. And he's fantastic at that stuff. And also, you know, an amazing guitar player in and of himself. And he wouldn't take that compliment if you gave it to him. But, you know, to go back a little bit, you did mention your brother Scott, and I would feel remiss not to mention that Scott, your brother, is in the band Face to Face.
Yes.
He plays bass, but he's also an unbelievable guitar player.
Yeah.
And I met Scott on his first tour of Face to Face. Hagfish toured with them. They were touring before that, just the album Face to Face came out. So I got to know Scott very well as well, and just saw him the other day. Anyway, I needed to go back and say that.
Oh yeah, and it should be noted, you know, if we're talking guitar and we're talking about my guitar playing, that my brother Scott is, without any question, the biggest influence on my guitar playing, period.
Absolutely.
You know, I picked up a lot of shit from him. And he's, you know, between the three of us, I always thought of Scott as he's just like the most natural musician. Just a guy that just oozes it. You know, he's, in my memory, he was always good from the time he like picked up, because he started as a bass player first.
Right.
And then, you know, probably just picked up my brother Mike's guitar, you know, when he was a kid too. And he rips at guitar, but yeah, he's a real natural.
Yeah, there's those guys. I mean, you know, fuck, my brother as well. A bassist, but he's always had a better ear than me. He's always been able to figure things out. You know, he's just there are all those people. They're good at music.
Yeah.
You know?
I would say if you leave my brother Scott in a room with an instrument that he's never seen before in his life and come back in an hour, he'll play a song. You know, he's like that. He's like that kind of guy.
He's got something.
Yeah.
So going back even further, who are your guys? Who are your dudes? Who are the guys that sort of influenced you?
I mean, the big one, the first one, I mean, it's hard to say because, you know, my earliest memories are like my brother's like Stones and Beatles records.
Sure.
So certainly, and as far as that goes, you know, it's probably Mick Taylor from the Stones is probably that guy.
Right.
Although, you know, like you can't discount Keith's guitar playing or Ron Wood. You know, like the Ron Wood era was the era when I was a kid. So, I mean, when I think of it, like probably one of the biggest influences ever on me is Some Girls, you know, and all his, well, both him and Keith playing lead all over that. It was a huge influence. But like the first person that I identified with is like, that's my fucking hero, Ace Frehley, no question.
For sure.
Yeah.
Our age, it's just there's a superhero playing guitar. How are you not?
Totally. Yeah.
You know, because I was playing with action figures, and then it was just like, whoa, there's an action figure playing a guitar. You know, it's like, how's it not? Yeah. How's that not going to translate?
We had a funny thing in my house where there was like, I remember the day that my brother Scott brought home the first Kiss record that we ever had. And he had traded something for it to a neighbor. We were living in Maryland. It would have been like, I don't know, 1976 or something, like right around there. And he brought home the originals. I don't know if you remember that, where they repackaged the first 3 records into one set.
Yeah,
called it
I do.
The originals, you know?
Yeah.
So he brought that home. And then we were all kind of obsessed with Kiss for a while. But pretty quickly, my brother Mike kind of went like, I don't know. Like that stuff's he was just like a little too old or something, you know what I mean? Right. Like, and me and Scott were just all about it. And it started this kind of inter-family, tension where Mike would be like, that shit is whack, you know what I mean? Like it's all about Zeppelin and Deep Purple and the stone, to Mike. Mike I think he was a little more serious,
Right.
And me and Scott were like, fuck it, they got blood and flames and smoke, So and that went on for a little while where we were just super Kiss centric. And then things started to evolve. Like, I don't know exactly what the order would have been, but maybe Scott got a little more, Van Halen comes out and stuff like that. And then he discovers Judas Priest and Rush and things like that. And then like for a while there, I was like the lone holdout. Like I rode that till like, into the time that the makeup like came off, what I mean? Like I was like, through the lean years of like Kiss Unmasked and The Elder and stuff like that, I'd be like debating those. This is fucking rad. Right. Where I was the last man standing in the house, but Kiss was just it. I can't like over. I mean, I can't put a big enough exclamation point on how much their music meant to me. At that age.
I think it's the right. We were at the right age, and you go back and listen to some of it now, and it's like it is sort of Bay City Rollers, you know what I mean? Totally. In places, but they're great fucking songs. They really are great songs. And I also feel like Gene Simmons does not get enough credit as a bass player. Like, what a genius fucking bass player he was.
Oh, yeah. And Ace Frehley's a fucking crazy guitar player. He's so good, I mean, he really he wrote like parts. His solos were like hooks,
hooks.
But there was also like, and he had that, like, he had like some Jeff Beck in there too, he was sure doing, did. Like, he wasn't just like, he wasn't a hack, that's for sure.
No, he definitely was not a hack. He definitely is not a hack. So to go back, maybe around then, but I remember you having the nickname Jackson. And for a long time, and people just called you Jackson. And that was because I would say, I think maybe before all that, you had a Jackson, or you had a Jackson during the 90s, or what? Where's that?
That's what I should claim at this point,
Yeah.
But no, I never owned. Well, I think I have a Jackson now because I have a Randy Rhoads model, which I believe is
you got to. Got to.
But I never had a Jackson back then. No, the way I got the nickname Jackson was because when I moved to San Francisco, I got a job at Fat Records, and I don't know if you remember Chris Dodge. Chris Dodge was working there.
Sure.
Chris Dodge ran the label back then. And so Mike, when he hired me, was like, hey, we already have somebody here named Chris, so you can't be Chris. Like and he goes, you have to come up with a nickname for yourself. I was like, what? I can't like give myself. That's not how nicknames work.
Yeah, that's not how they work.
But and I think he even referenced like who do you like El Jefe or something, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
I forget what the logic was, why he was El Jefe or something, whatever. So the next day he came in, and he was like, all like happy because I figured out your name. I came up with a name for you. I was like, oh, cool. What is it? And he goes, it's Jackson. I go, oh, why? He goes, because you don't look like a Jackson. It's like ultimate, Fat Mike logic.
We'll see. I remember him trying to tell. Maybe it was like Rise Against. He said a great band name would be "It's the Cops," like with an exclamation point. It's the Cops. Right. Anyway, so I always thought, since you and me always commiserated about our metal pasts, that it was because maybe there was a photo that had surfaced of you with a Jackson guitar.
You would think.
That's I mean,
especially, you talk about influence. Randy Rhoads was
sure.
Like after Ace Frehley was the next, big guitar icon for me. And he played Jackson. So there you go. I should have, by all, counts, I should have had a Jackson somewhere in there, but I never did.
And you should have been nicknamed Jackson for it.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, my first guitar, because when I first started playing guitar, I just used my brother Mike's acoustic.
Right.
To go take lessons and learn like pentatonic scales and stuff.
Yeah.
And then when I got my first guitar, it was a Takamine copy of one of those Aria Pro 2 Explorer shapes.
Yeah.
It's kind of like an Explorer, but small and with like, it's all kind of rounded. And
sure.
And I had that for a couple of years, and then I sold that, and a kid at my school was selling his Les Paul. And I got that in I think that was like 10th grade that I got that Les Paul. And then I was just like, that's all I had for a very long time.
Did you play that in No Use?
Oh yeah. No, I don't know if you remember, but that black Les Paul that I've always played in No Use was that guitar, which I still have. But I retired it from the road long ago. But I'll tell you a cool story. Pat Smear last year for my 50th birthday, because over the years, like touring with that guitar, I bastardized the shit out of it, got rid of the pick guard, put all kinds of different pickups in. I have no idea where any of the original stuff sort of wound up. Drew on it, just did all kinds of dumb shit. Sort of not, it's like, it's the 90s. I'll put stickers on it. Cool. Right. And Pat, a couple of years ago, bought on eBay. It just blew my mind. The exact same guitar. It's in 1982. They call it a Black Beauty, Les Paul Black Beauty. It doesn't really seem to have anything to do with the old Black Beauties from like whatever that was, 68 or something. Like, it's not triple pickup. It's not a custom. It's a weird, I don't know what it was. It's that year. I don't know if you remember, around that time, Gibson's started putting out these cool, it's got these machine heads that have like flip tuners on them.
The little flip tuner.
It's like the best
hand
invention. Yeah. So anyway, so Pat bought one of those guitars, but it was like, had been like never been played. It's literally brand, it looks newer than when I even got my guitar back in 1985 or whatever.
It's not a custom?
No, it's got some kind of details of a custom and details of a standard, and I don't, it's weird. It's a really,
that's crazy.
I will, it's a very strange guitar. But so when Pat bought one of those, I was like, oh my god, dude, you got, and that led us to talking about my guitar. And he went out and found the period correct pickups for me and gave them to me for my 50th birthday to restore it to its, more or less original form.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I didn't know at the time that those pickups, would be like, sought after. It's I forget the guy's name, Tim something or other. It's like that era of humbuckers.
I know exactly. Yes, I do know, and I mean, there's Seth Lover, but I also know that anyway. So real quick, do you think it's the gear or the player, or do you think
I think that it's the player, and I would add to that I think oftentimes people who are sort of overly obsessed with gear, in my opinion, seem to do it because they can't play very well. Now, and I realize that's a totally subjective thing. Like, there's plenty of people out there that would be like, you can't play very well, motherfucker. I
don't think anybody would say that.
Oh, people say that. But yeah, I think that rarely do you come across like where those two things are in balance.
Sure.
And for me, it was actually totally out of balance, where I never thought about gear to my detriment. I mean, for too long, I didn't think about gear. I knew I liked the Les Paul, I knew I liked I liked the classic guitars, like I was always drawn to, hollow bodies and old Gretches and ES335s and Telecasters and whatever, what I mean? I like the classic shit. But to this day, I think maybe because I didn't think about it ever in those sort of formative years, but I still struggle to like, I know what old amps I like, and I know why I like them tonally and all that stuff, but I don't really have the depth of knowledge about like the sort of like how they all work and why they sound the way they do and what's going on behind the scenes that colors this, that, and the other. And even like, throwing together a pedal board, I'm always like, wait, do I put the delay first or do
I I'm there too.
Like
I'm
what I mean? I was like, have to Google that shit. You know what I mean? Because I never had pedals until I joined the Foo Fighters. Never. Never had them at all. I never had overdrives. I never had delay. And then when I joined Foos, there were a bunch of songs where I had to have that stuff. And it was that was really challenging,
Sure.
I never did two things either. That were the most. Yeah, it's weird. I never had. So I missed that whole period where you're like, dude, the vintage memory man, and it does this and it's known for this. So I feel like it's sort of like a gap in my quiver that I'm probably never really gonna make up for. You know what I mean? But that's why you rely on great producers and engineers and friends.
I think that's okay though, and I think that's one of the things that adds to what makes you so special. Guys like you and me, we grew up in vans. We were touring in vans in the 90s. The 90s for you and me. And it was an amp and a fucking guitar. We didn't, you know what I mean? Sometimes we were getting to the gig and literally throwing our shit on stage. We were our own techs. We were driving the van ourselves. So we come from that. And
Shannon, by the way, Shannon's going to resent that if I claim to have been my own tech. Because technically he was my tech.
Hi, Shannon. Shannon Gabriel, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. Well, so I think the first time I used a pedal was in Guar, and it was a Crybaby for leads because the guy I replaced used one. And then with Rise, shit, I just added a Phase 90 like a few years back, and now I have like a very modest pedal board. But that was one of the things that I was so impressed with you specifically is still how much of that aesthetic you still sort of adhere to, because you guys are playing Wembley Arena or Madison Square Garden, and you still have Fender or Gibson guitar, pedal board, and 412 cabinets behind you. You're not Kemper and Fractal and all this other horse shit. And I think that's so impressive. And so to me, I just respected the shit out of it. And I was like, you know what? That's all you have to do.
Well, I mean, not like the stuff we were doing in the 90s was the most dynamic, you know what I mean? But because a lot of it was just like all the time. But it did, the fact that I didn't have pedals and didn't use even like the channel changer or anything on my dual rectifier or whatever. Like, you had to sort of learn how to play, how to like approach it differently in your hands and with your volume knob.
Absolutely.
And I still do that a lot today. Like that, I think, and I tried all kinds of different things over the years. I tried just doing hard A/B switching from this to that, and even do a little bit of that now. But most of the time, if I want to have a cleaner tone, I'm just rolling it down to 7. You know what I mean? And that's where the dynamic comes from. And then approach.
I work a Les Paul. I use my neck pickup and I swell in, and then I use the things that we because we didn't have much back then. And you can tell that we smell our own. I've always been able to tell that about your playing. It's like he comes from this. So no matter how big this thing is getting or no matter how big that room is, you still have the aesthetic of somebody that drove there in a van. You know what I mean? And that's amazing.
It's funny because I feel like the bigger the venue, the less that stuff is actually noticeable to anybody.
Absolutely.
But you still do it. Like a lot of like tone stuff, I feel like on guitar just gets lost in the soup,
Yeah, for sure.
But you still do it anyway.
You still do it.
That's how you entertain yourself.
It matters to you. It matters
totally,
to you.
because what's coming through my in-ears, maybe that doesn't actually project into the room, but it sounds fucking great.
Sounds great to you. That's all that matters.
Yeah.
And and the argument gets made, especially to guys like you and me, about Kemper profilers and all that stuff. And I hear the arguments, man. I hear it all. And I'm not saying I'll never do it, because it does make sense. Brian Baker from Minor Threat, Bad Religion, Dag Nasty, he is on Kemper now. And him and I talked about it a lot on here. And I hear the arguments, man, but it's so hard for me,
I'll tell you, I have actually, it's one thing if it's Foo Fighters, because of course my preference is to actually have an amp on stage, and to be loud and to get that. My favorite tone in the world is amp, not a pedal, it's amp gain. And it's got to be loud, you know what I mean? You got to have it at a certain volume to get that, to make it do its thing. And that is always my preference, no matter what. If I have the luxury of not having to load it in and out of a van myself. You know what I mean? And I find for my solo stuff, I've moved into smaller and smaller and smaller amps over the years, where like nowadays, usually when I go out, I'll take a Princeton, like an old Princeton reverb, you know,
it's great.
Fits in the back of the van easy. It's, you know, you pick that thing up, throw it, you know, it's easy, you know. But I've been because there's with with my solo thing, a lot of the time I will wind up playing gigs on off nights on Foo Fighter tours, you know, because we'll wind up having a couple off nights in a town. I'll be there. I'll just go do a gig, and I'll do that with just me and an acoustic guitar, which is a fun dynamic. Sure. But it's not the dynamic I really want to play those songs in. So I've been building this thing, or I'm not building it, but working with some people that know how to do that stuff to build me like a track system. You know?
Oh, rad.
Yes. And with that, so that they've been like, you know, sort of, I've had a couple of rehearsals with it. I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to do that live, if it would be me and a drummer, or just me kind of playing certain parts, because we just take all the shit off my records and have something to play against. Because that's the thing that, you know, as a guitar player, that's what I miss, is having a bed of chords to play something over. You know what I mean? That's the thing that you miss, or for me, I miss it when I'm playing those acoustic shows. So I've been messing with that, and along with that, I've been using one of those Strymon. Have you seen those Strymon Iridium amp modelers? Yes. And dude, it's fucking crazy how good that thing sounds.
I wrote one of those down to check out, because it's kind of simple. It's like made for, you know, they have like 3 different amps and 3 different cab simulators.
The 3 different amps, it's like they made it with me in mind. The 3 different amps are a deluxe reverb,
right,
an AC30, and a fucking Plexi.
No shit.
It's like, it's exactly the range of amps that I would be playing with anyway.
Wow.
It's perfect. And it's really simple. And I think kind of the upside of that is like, I mean, just imagine you're doing a van solo tour.
Right.
And now now I can bring like 2 guitars, my pedal board with the fucking little Iridium pedal on it.
Yeah.
And my track system in a Pelican case.
And you're done.
Oh my God, dude. You're stretched out on that back seat. Fucking take that, man. Totally. Shannon's behind the wheel.
Yeah.
I mean,
you're
come
done.
on.
You're done.
That's luxury, baby.
That's a motherfucker that spent a lot of time in a van. You're thinking about the space in the van.
Totally.
Where you're not sitting next to
I can bring out all the merch. I don't have to have that shit sent, you know, like down the road. It's going to be very, very comfortable. But it's also the interesting thing that where I've changed my thinking on that a little bit is, a lot of times for those kind of tours, you know, I'm not bringing a sound guy. You're just kind of, it's like you're rolling the dice. You're rolling the dice in a club where you don't know what the sound system's going to be. And I do kind of like the idea, and I know it's cheating, and I never thought I would say this, but the idea that like you're sort of removing the possibility of the guy that doesn't know what he's doing, miking your amp up shitty and making it sound terrible in the room. It's like, it's going to sound perfect every time.
Right.
And there's a, you know,
do those Strymons, do you need a power amp for those Strymons, or are they're good?
No, I don't think so.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. But I don't know if you have to like run it into a DI or something before it hits the PA. I'm not sure.
It's so funny you mentioned that, because I wrote that down as like, oh shit, those amp choices seem cool. I like things being simple. I like a pedal doing the thing that I want it to fucking do and leaving it there.
Absolutely.
I looked up like Zakk Wylde pedal board. He has a real simple pedal board. He always has. He has like, you know, his lead boost, phase 90, a crybaby, and you know, some of that. I was like, that I like that. I like just looking at it and going, I know what everything does. I have it set, done. And I saw that pedal as like, as far as a profile, because even a Kemper, a Fractal seems way above my fucking pay grade. I don't think I'll ever get it.
I don't want to have to learn a whole new like operating system to anything ever.
Yeah, it's like a new language. I just wanted to do the fucking shit that I want to. And guys like you and me, we know our tone. We've been doing this a long time. I know my tone.
Yeah.
I know how I want to sound. And it's so funny how you said that earlier about, you know, I was talking to a guy the other day that was talking about tube differences and all that stuff. And it's like, I know tubes I like 6505s barely. I just know that they have like more headroom. You know what I mean? And then I Googled how, you know, the proper channel track of like setting up pedals as well, like what goes first. And I mean, 30 years into my career, but I like that I don't know that. I like that you don't know that.
Yeah.
You know,
I tell you what, you know who really taught me a lot, taught me a lot, but also made me just want to think about that stuff maybe a little bit more, was I made a couple records with Dave Cobb.
Oh, right.
From my solo stuff. And that's a guy that gets that balance right. I mean, he knows everything about vintage gear and how to use it to get the tone. Like, oh, you want that Jimmy Page thing? You know, just go grab some and just here's what you do. That kind of shit. Like he's like, there's a real art to that. Like not like I really appreciate that. Like people that know the gear and know how to make it work the way you want it to sound.
Yeah.
Well, because like how many times have you gotten something that like your favorite guy did, and then you plug it in and you're like, oh, fuck, I don't get this at all. Like, what the fuck? It's like, I remember I did that with a treble booster. Like, huh? This it just makes everything sound terrible. I was like, how do you even use this thing?
I did that. I did like 2 or 3 different treble boosters trying to do like the Brian May thing, and
yes, exactly. I'm like, how did he do that? Like, to this day, I don't know. They just sit on the shelf at my studio.
Yeah. Not only did it not sound like Brian May, it didn't even sound like Tony Iommi, who also used it. It's like, wait,
exactly.
I missed the mark on both.
By the way, that will be the mean-spirited comments when you post this. Like, those fucking idiots. Oh, they call themselves guitar players. They don't even know how to use a treble booster.
Well, fuck everyone that says that. Fuck them.
Yeah.
Fuck them. We toured in vans, goddammit.
Goddamn right.
Let's see them go fucking tour in advance. You know, you always also I'd be remiss not to your signature Telecaster. I've seen that, you know, it's not very often a signature model guitar breaks out of being, you know, the people that collect are the guys that are huge fans of your band or whatever. I see people using your 2 humbucker to Tele Deluxe. I see people using that all the time now. And I think every time I see it, I'm like, that's my buddy's guitar. And I'm always really proud of you. It's awesome.
Well, you know, what was great is that when we put that together, I mean, the whole way that came together was I had built a couple of parts guitars like that, you know, because I had bought one of those old Teles with the wide range pickups in it and loved it. It just wasn't quite like it wasn't quite humbuckery. Well, because it's not humbuckers, but it just didn't quite have the oomph of what you sort of need most of the time in the Foo Fighters. So that's sort of why I built those parts guitars. And then when Fender saw that, they're like, hey, why don't we just make like a Fender of that, you know?
Yeah.
And at that time, they really didn't have anything in their lineup that was quite that filled that gap. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like a Tele with humbuckers and a rosewood fretboard, you know?
Right.
And so I feel like it was just like, that's why I put my name on the back of the headstock, was for exactly that reason. Cause I was like, I want people who don't know who I am, don't like me, don't give a shit about the music I mean, or whatever, to also want to buy this thing.
To also want to buy it.
Yeah, because it's just a good guitar, and it filled a thing that they weren't covering at that moment, you know.
And then your newer one has the P90s, which I thought was genius as well. And you were able to, what's great about that guitar is I saw you here in Austin. You did a solo gig at the Continental Club, and then you did a Foo Fighters gig, and you used that same Campbell Soup P90, which was fucking genius. That guitar is so versatile that you're able to sort of do the different things with it.
It works good in the Foos because, you know, there's 3 of us, and it's over the years I've tried to I'm always kind of aware of trying to like have a somewhat different tone, like sort of sit somewhere different in the soup than everybody else, because when we play, it is a big wall of sound, you know.
Right.
And then it works great for the more sort of like twangy honky tonk stuff. Like if you know, that guitar reacts so different if you plug it into a Marshall or a Friedman than if you plug it into a Princeton, you know.
Well, one thing I've always noticed about the Foo Fighters, with all 3 of you guys' respective styles, and you to call back to the Stones and Ron Wood and Keith Richards, it's also something I read about with the Grateful Dead, which I'm not a Grateful Dead fan, but it's weaving, and you guys are all three always sort of weaving in and out of each other's parts and not stepping on each other's toes. And someone's always doing something a little different. Pat always, a lot of the times he's using sort of a baritone guitar and things like that.
Yeah.
And I've always thought that was really interesting. Tim and I have always tried to do that as well, because why have a bunch of guys up there doing the same exact thing?
Right. Right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So we put a lot of thought into that early when Pat first came back, and then it just kind of became the sort of natural thing that we kind of just fall into when we're playing.
Well, so it would probably, I was imagining in that, to respect to that, in respect to that, having a P90 does help you sit somewhere, because, those guys are using humbuckers, and here you are in your own thing.
Yeah.
How important are the Friedman amps? I know you've been a long time Friedman guy, which I love those amps.
I love them, man. I fell in love with those things. I remember that we were rehearsing at Mates one day years ago, and my guitar tech, Sean, was like, "Oh man, you want to hear a good amp? You should walk over there and plug into that thing. It's ridiculous." And I went over there, and he had his like demo amp in there that was set up like wet dry, like Eddie Van Halen style. Like, have you ever played with that?
No, I haven't, and I've heard.
Dude,
I haven't never done it.
That is like, if you want to just sit in your living room and feel like you're playing a stadium, like that's the way to do it. It totally, like, you just feel like you can do no wrong when you've got that wet dry thing happening. And it just sold me. I was like, fucking sign me up. I'll put the down payment now. Let me get them in.
Now I want to do it. Is that what you do? Yeah. Do you wet dry live?
I only recently kind of started doing, not in that classic Eddie Van Halen way, but what I've been doing for the last, I don't know, half year or something is I have one of those what's the that Strymon Deco, that pedal?
Yeah.
And you can set it, there's a way you can set it where you run it in stereo and you do wet dry, but I have it so it's just a tape, it's like that tape double. And I set it to where it's almost like, I don't have it like a slap, like I have it like almost, it's just barely offset, just barely, like you almost can't hear it, but it's all you're hearing out of the left side is the tape sound, and then all you're hearing is the dry sound out of the other one. So it just makes your sound, it's just super wide.
Well, next time we hang out, we're gonna have to Eddie Van Halen it and go crazy.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, the guy that's putting together my track setup is like a guitar playing genius and very smart. And he showed me that. He was over at my studio. He's like, "Hey man, you ever do this with this thing?" And he just started fucking around with my pedal. And it was one of those moments like, wow, I have no idea what this kid is doing. But all of a sudden, my sound went from to like fucking. I was like, I'm gonna do that all the time now.
God, bless those guys that show guys like you and me. Like, you could be doing this with this thing. Like, oh shit, I can.
Look at all this unlocked potential.
Exactly. That would make it my job so much easier. I'm fighting this thing every night. And this thing, I've got it right here, and all I have to do is turn this thing, whatever it is.
It's great too, because with that, like, I've also run my other delay in stereo too, and so when you have that thing going, where you've got like, you can pan the delays and everything, and have that slap thing, and so you start to get into some really cool, wide, big sounding tones.
I did just do sort of a crash course and a deep dive into all I've been listening to lately is Killing Joke, as you do, and Jordy from Killing Joke, and Dave played on their amazing 2003 record just called Killing Joke. But he has always been that guy, had two different delays going and sort of always researched the sort of the timing frequencies and everything else. So he's always been like that guy, and always been delay has been almost just this essential part of his rig. And he's all, he writes riffs with delay and stuff like that. And so that blew my mind. I was just like, oh God, I couldn't imagine, not only writing one riff, but writing a whole record where the timing in your delay is as important as everything else, all the other ingredients. It's just like, it blows my mind. Yeah.
I found a thing, and I'll send it to you, that was really interesting. I've never applied it, but it would be fun to mess with. I've messed with it just sitting around. I'll just set up the sort of offset delays, but I found some website where a guy broke down a bunch of the Edge's delay settings from classic
I would love that.
U2 songs, because he does that a lot where they're set to different, they're like the timing's different. So it's like when they sort of overlap and rub on each other, it creates that crazy thing that is instantly recognizable as the Edge, but
his thing. It's genius. And and then like Tom Morello has two different delays. He has the same delay pedal. It's a Boss delay pedal. One set one way, one set the other way, and he just knows those two settings, and that's his thing. It's like, well, that appeals a little more to me,
totally.
So I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I always ask, what do you have one that got away, a piece of gear and guitar and amp? You got one that like you lost or got stolen, or you had to hawk it or whatever?
God, well, that is there's the only one. Well, there's a couple ones that I could think of, but this one wasn't. Actually, there's a few. I'll tell you a few quick versions of that. So
guys like us always have them.
The one that hurts the most is I had an MXR Distortion Plus when I was a kid. That was like the one overdrive I ever had, and that would have been like the early mid '80s, and I got that because that was the one that Randy Rhoads used,
Sure. As you did.
And at that time I could barely play and, wouldn't have known how to use the thing anyway. And I don't even remember ever actually using it outside of just like plugging it into my brother's amp or whatever.
Right.
But I don't know where the fuck that ever wound up. It just like disappeared somewhere, probably left at a keg party or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Please tell me you've got another one.
I have not. I have never replaced it, and it would have been vintage by now. I mean, we're so old that would very much be a vintage pedal at this point.
And the folks that the MXR people sponsor this podcast, so if they're listening,
nice, well, feel free to send me one of your retro series.
Well, do you know who the guy is? Ken Yamazaki from Fat Wreck.
I know. He, I bug Ken fairly. Maybe I bug him too much.
Okay.
Ken, stuff, but he's always great. He always does.
Yeah, he's always the best. He's always the best.
Yeah, you can't ask more than once every 6 months or something.
That's true. That's true.
Around that same time, or a little bit later, my brother Mike had I don't know why he bought this, but he bought a Music Man full stack when we were kids.
Yeah.
And he never really even played in bands much or anything. So that kind of became my amp that I used for years in the early years. And then in like 1989, I bought my first Boogie. And then my band started using the Music Man amp as our PA. And we went and played a party in Isla Vista one night, and I got drunk and I left it there. And I don't know why, but I just never went back to get it.
No shit.
Yeah. I lived in Santa Barbara at the time. I would have been like a 20-minute drive to go back to the keg party and pick. It was probably just sitting there in the carport, and I just never went back. So that's another one that disappeared.
That thing is in some pawn shop or
because
those old Music Man amps honk, man. They sound great. They were loud as fuck, and they were loud and clean.
Yes, loud and clean, and that's why I hated it. Because I didn't have an overdrive and know how to use it, except for that. The one that I just said, but I don't know what happened to it. But it used to drive me crazy because it was just way too clean. And when I got that, I got a Boogie Mark III, and it was like shunk.
Oh, sure. Yeah. You're getting the thing.
But there was so much headroom in the Music Man. It worked great for the PA, It
works great for the PA. And it's one of those things where I remember fucking with one, and any Marshall or even any Fender combo, at a certain point, it's going to start breaking up, you know, fairly decently. And those fucking Music Mans, you could dime them. It's just clean as fuck. Well, those are good. I think those are good. Well, Ken, if you're listening, we need an MX.
We need a couple of just whatever the fuck those things are called.
Two tree. Well, Chris, I don't want to keep you much longer, buddy.
Thanks, man.
It's so goddamn good to see you and to talk to you as always.
Absolutely. Miss you, pal. And this was fun. Thanks for having me on here. I love that you're doing this.
Oh, thank you, man. I mean, I figured, guys like you and me, we were going to sit and talk about this shit anyway.
Yeah.
For like
might as well record it. Yeah.
Might as well record it and see if people want to listen to two guys that have known each other for 30 years talk about guitar shit.
Well, I've been on a little podcast hiatus, but when I get back to it, I would love for you to come. Let me put you in the hot seat.
See, you heard it right here, folks. Yeah. I will be on Chris Shiflett show. You anytime you want me, buddy. Yeah. You know I'm always around.
We won't be able to talk gear at all because we just covered that, but I'll just add really probing. Like, tell me about your relationship with your brother, really.
Well, considering I just got off the phone with him, yeah. How is Donnie Blair? Yeah. All right, I'll talk at you soon, man, and good luck. Good luck with everything.
Awesome. All right.